Thank you. Your Excellency, President Uhuru Kenyatta, the President of the Republic of Kenya, our distinguished heads of state and government, President of our UN Assembly, the interim president, my sister, Kristalina Georgieva of the World Bank, our acting head of our UN Environment Program, colleagues, friends, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Karibu Nisana UN. I'd like to thank at this point the President Uhuru Kenyatta for his generosity and hospitality in being with us at this conference. It's an incredibly important time for us. We are at a juncture where we need to take our words to actions. But let me also add my condolences to the government and people of Kenya, but also the government of Ethiopia, and all the bereaved relatives of those from many nations who lost their loved ones in last week's tragic air crash. Of course, many of the UN family, from our staff to that of the World Bank, to, of course, our NGOs and delegates from very many of our member states. I would like to join you in sorrow, but in strong conviction, as the President of the Assembly said, let us carry on their fight in their name for people, planet. And then I say, we also join you in solidarity and the resolution to finally turn the tides towards ambitious policies that enable strong economies and protect the health of our planet. This is the fourth year this Assembly has grown from strength to strength in highlighting and proposing solutions to some of the most important environmental challenges of our time. We continue to count on the wisdom of this body because globally our environment is under extreme pressure, and we've heard that from our leaders this morning. We're at an unprecedented turning point in our planet, and this UN Environment Assembly is an opportunity to change that trajectory from one of impacts and loss to one of solutions and actions. I just looked at one of our Time magazine covers. 15 years ago, Kofi Annan was on that cover. And what it said in the corner was the meltdown of the Arctic. And in the other corner it said, ending wars, making our leaders twitch. 15 years later, we need to know that urgency doesn't mean decades. It needs to happen now. The focus of this UN Environment Assembly is on innovative solutions for environmental challenges and sustainable consumption and production. Today, I'd like to highlight the solutions and innovations we need across three key themes. The first, sustainable consumption and production and supply chains. The second, biodiversity loss and conservation. And last but not least, climate change. First, let's look at our patterns of consumption and production, the focus of this Assembly. In 2017, resources extracted from Mother Earth reached 90 billion metric tons. Less than 10% of those resources were recycled back into the economy. Millions of tons of plastic are flowing into our oceans with devastating consequences for marine life. Every day, we live with the shortcomings of a linear economic model based on take, make, and dispose. These shortcomings are exemplified by the way we produce, use, and discard mobile telephones. I'm sure everyone in this room has one. These phones that we use are all typically built with at least 60 different metals, from graphite to silicon. Extraction of many of these metals is extremely harmful to the environment and to the people and communities living in those environments and extracting. Meanwhile, at the other end of production and consumption chain, some 45 million tons of electronic waste, worth about $55 billion, are generated every year. And this figure, sadly, is growing, with less than 20% today recycled or reused. Rising levels of discarded electronic waste pose risks to human health and climate change, seeping toxins into the soil and water tables, affecting the quality of water we drink, and emitting methane, which contributes to rising greenhouse gas emissions. Our solution to break out of these unsustainable cycles of consumption and production is clear. We must change our perception that economic progress requires a depletion of natural resources. Inspiring actions by civil society and governments at all levels and corporations show us that we can, in fact, achieve greater economic benefits from innovative approaches to how we eat, we purchase, travel, and discard waste. For example, the initiative in Kiribati Islands provides families with unique hydroponic systems to make food without soil. Large hotel chains such as the Hilton have recently committed to reduce water consumption and waste by 50%. and countries are beginning to entirely eliminate single-use plastics. Costa Rica intends to phase them out by 2021, and India by 2022. These are just a few examples of the transitions we need to more sustainable consumption and production habits. We must focus on creating products with few components and products that last rather than tossing them after a single use. And we must support the regrowth of all renewable resources to ensure that they are available for future generations. We must, in effect, create a circular economy. And as President Uhuru was just speaking to me now, we talked about actually the circular economy and no waste was in fact indigenous to Africa. As we grew up as children, nothing went to waste. So it's a pleasure to see our elders here today remind us that there is something in our culture that we can bring now for future generations. Second, I would like to turn to biodiversity loss, which is also linked to our unsustainable consumption and production habits. Our use of land and resources to fuel our economy leads to the destruction of vital ecosystems and habitats. As a former Minister of Environment, I witnessed this firsthand with the effort of remediation in Ogoniland, the largest ever oil disaster. The Global Resource Outlook, released earlier this week, finds that extraction and processing of resources is responsible for a staggering 90% of biodiversity loss and water stress globally. Since 1970, the extent of wetlands in Europe and Central Asia has declined by 50%, and around 40% of land in Western Asia is at risk of desertification. The potential impact on health, on economy, and society of ongoing biodiversity loss is tremendous. For example, the economic value of nature in the Americas is estimated at approximately $24.3 trillion annually. Solutions are available to safeguard ecosystems and the biological diversity of this planet. We do need innovative solutions to manage protected areas, and we need to promote more sustainable use and management of terrestrial and aquatic resources. For example, in South Africa, a tax break is being tested, which benefits landowners who declare protected areas on their land. In India, a woman farmers group is working to conserve traditional crops using seed banks and traditional farming practices. And biodiversity enterprise funds continue to grow in numbers, investing into small and medium enterprises and cooperatives which prioritize conservation. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my third point today, looming above all of our work, is climate change. It threatens our natural ecosystems, our agriculture, our economies, our health, our security, our future. Climate change, too, is linked to our unsustainable consumption and production habits. We learned this week that 53% of emissions are caused by the extraction and processing of these resources. Last year alone, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said we have only 12 years to change course. Time is fast running out. Otherwise, we will endure irreversible consequences. So the time is now to take a big, ambitious leap. In Katowice, countries adopted a rulebook to guide their efforts to combat climate change and to move to greater ambition. We now have a comprehensive legal framework to implement the Paris Agreement, adopted by members of the UNFCCC and welcomed by authorities in the private sector. And on September the 23rd this year, the Secretary General will convene a Climate Action Summit in New York to reinforce the ambition, call, and urge us all to accelerate climate action. We need ambition and we need urgency. The Secretary General is calling on leaders to come to the summit not with another speech, but with a plan for reducing emissions by 45% over the next decade and reaching the goal of zero net emissions in 2050. A plan to decarbonize electricity and to finally build more sustainable infrastructure in cities. A plan to create not only green jobs, but decent green jobs. A plan ambitious enough and credible enough to convince all our people taking to the streets that they are taken very seriously. Around the world, many innovative solutions are already being developed. In Singapore, the government has engaged in extensive greening efforts that have helped reduce energy demand and thus reducing the need for air conditioning. In the US, a company called Solider Technologies is planning to tweak the way in which concrete is made with 70% lower emissions. So we can go beyond governments to the public sector when we look for climate action. The Climate Summit will promote the scaling up and the replication of such solutions. It will raise ambition and action across following areas: energy, industry, finance, carbon pricing, nature-based solutions, resilience and adaptation, the infrastructure, cities and local action. In addition, the summit will aim to mobilize public opinion and propose solutions to the political and social challenges that impede ambitious climate action. The summit will be a moment of global ambition and inclusive multilateralism. It will demonstrate that solutions exist and are ready to be deployed at scale by governments and all actors. The governments and non-governmental stakeholders will have a plan to set the world on a sustainable and equitable path. Ladies and gentlemen, the call really is to action. As we gather here in Nairobi during a time of unprecedented urgency and the need for action, our work here this week is heavier than anyone had expected. Our urgency and heaviness is compounded with the extreme loss of bright environmental leaders, youth trailblazers who were nominated by their government to travel to Nairobi to advocate for environmental protection and marine conservation. A staff member of UNEP who was a committed gender advocate and passionate champion of sustainable development and the goals, and the links to the environment. And a World Bank staff member who dedicated his life to connecting people around climate change solutions, from storytelling to photography. These environmental and climate actors, these concerned actors in our human community, and the many other victims whose time does not allow me to name, came to Nairobi with a purpose, as you all have. There are no words for these times of loss, but we must honor these leaders with an urgency in the work that we do. With each new campaign, new change in our consumption patterns, or fund we will help start, we are taking strides. It must be done by each and every one of us, individually and collectively. I plead with you to internalize your responsibility and to turn your concerns into actions. All here today, I ask you to bring young people into the center of your work, especially our women and our girls. Ask them to be disruptive in finding solutions to the way in which companies produce, to the loss of biodiversity in our world, and to their national governments' responses to climate change. In the past 2 days, I've been inspired by the bold partnerships, ideas, and innovations I've seen in support of the hashtag #SolveDifferent campaign. My last point is to stress the importance of partnerships to strengthen and scale our collective work. National governments must provide spaces to illuminate and scale this growing groundswell of action on climate and the environment. Make sure that you bring in city leaders to your policy-making decisions. Cities are the closest levels of government to the people and can act as innovation labs for national government solutions. The private sector leaders are devising some of the most ambitious commitments on environmental protection and climate action, from private equity funds dedicated to biodiversity to 100% renewable energy-fueled supply chains. Let's take these ideas, let's scale them so that people everywhere can see that a sustainable future is not only possible, but it is happening. It just needs more urgency and more scale. We must show the world that it is not only necessary, but imminently possible to reshape our global economy into one that rewards careful stewardship and punishes waste and pollution. Let us turn 2019 into a year of transformative solutions. I thank you.